Okay, so let's go through this activity on natural, artificial, and sexual selection. What should you get from this? So in your lab, you talked about natural selection. You did the little dots, right? And what are the postulates that have to be in place for natural selection to take place? Now remember, natural selection is just one of the possible ways that evolution occurs. It's one of the most common, so we spend a whole lab on it. But you learned about the other ones in Hardy-Weinberg, right? Genetic drift, gene flow, non-random mating, mutation. Okay, those are all causing evolution as well, but natural selection is one of the biggest causes. And so, and in order for that to occur, you have to have all this variation already present in the population, like we talked about. Okay, that it has to be heritable, that there have to be more organisms alive than can survive, so that there will be limiting factors, and some will be selected for and some will be selected against, and there have to be differences in fitness in the organisms so that only some survive. And so then I had you watch a little video on artificial selection. So we call it artificial when humans are involved in manipulating it, even though we're part of nature and really it's natural selection. But artificial selection is when we're like selectively breeding and mating them. And they gave several different things, including what we now call GMOs, genetically modifying organisms. So that's where they're actually causing mutations or introducing genes like that little bacterial gene into the crops. So all of those are sort of an artificial selection. We select for what we like the best. But then sexual selection is a form of selection that we kind of group into that non-random mating category of Hardy-Weinberg. So you watch the Birds of Paradise video and just how they'll select for certain traits to breed with them, and sometimes those traits are not super beneficial. Okay, so some organisms have like these really flashy displays that are likely to get them killed, but they're also likely to get them to mate before they get killed. And really remember, fitness is all about the number of organisms or number of offspring you have, not about how long your life is. And so sometimes sexual selection can drive these really bizarre characteristics that don't seem to be very fit, but they are in terms of reproducing before you die. Okay, and then it talked about the evolution of sex itself. And you can see in different environments, sexual and asexual reproduction can be beneficial, right? And asexual is stuck around, so it must be beneficial. It produces tons of offspring that have your genetics, but there's not a lot of variety. And so the one big benefit of sexual reproduction is that you're bringing together variety and getting more variety for which natural selection can select upon. And so that's kind of why we think sexual selection evolved, but it seems to happen so slowly that it's almost like the benefits don't come about until after you've experienced the detriments of it. Um, but it still exists and seems to be beneficial because we're bringing about mutations, beneficial mutations, and we're purging out non-beneficial mutations. And then it went through sexual dimorphism. So you looked at the elephant seals. That's where you have the male bigger than the female. This often occurs when there's competition within the species for mates. So humans kind of fall into this category. We've got some sexual dimorphism with the males generally being bigger than the females because there's that competition between males. So that's the major benefit, right? Competition between the males, and then the males are going to protect the females. Whereas if you've got lots of threats from outside your species, so you get preyed upon or you have to compete for resources, it benefits you to have either lots of offspring or big offspring. And so then in that case, the female's body needs to be really big. So in the case of the black widow, the female's really big so she can produce tons of babies. And so sometimes it's good for the male to be big, sometimes it's good for the female to be big. And it also occurs, you get this sexual dimorphism when the species aren't monogamous, right? When they don't mate for life. Species that are monogamous, you tend to see less differences between males and females. But if they're not monogamous, you see these big differences. And then we'll talk about who's more choosy in class. So that's it, okay?